All right, so we can already see the first people filing in from Italy, from the Netherlands, from the UAE, from Sweden, from Romania, from Canada. Just to mention a few, I can see there's more ticking in here. And good morning, good morning, Stuart. It must be early for you. This is great to see. So, welcome everyone. Scott, before we kick off, can I ask you what are you most excited about when it comes to Scale Up Europe? You've been in the deep end of this for quite some time now.
Yeah, there's three things that I think are super exciting about Scale Up Europe. The first one is the feedback from the participants. And we'll cover that today, but all the participants who've been involved in Scale Up Europe so far take away something really tangible that can help them. The second is the opportunity right now in Europe where venture is finally being recognized as an asset class, and there are in almost every country throughout Europe real developments being made in various stages of building the ecosystems in venture. And so I'm super excited to see that. And then the third area that I think is really important is this opportunity for collaboration. So all of the strategy tools partners, as well as the different players in the ecosystem that we work and collaborate with, having this opportunity to build and move faster. So the acceleration, which I see as fundamental towards getting to our goal.
Fantastic. And while we're speaking, there's quite a few more people joining in, so we're gonna make sure we get everyone in here. But on that note, welcome everyone. And this is actually really exciting because it's officially our launch webinar. And in our webinar today, we're going to walk through why we're developing Scale Up Europe, what we've learned so far, how it works, and how everyone can be using it. But I think it's safe to say that the conversations around entrepreneurship in Europe has really shifted in the last 12 months. And there is a significant amount of focus on the scaling up part, which we didn't maybe have as clearly before, but we'll get to that. So before we kind of kick off with the main content, first of all, please feel free to say hi in the chat. For those of you that are just joining and just coming in, feel free to say hello, where you're joining from in the chat. Everyone's welcome to ask questions along the way. So Scott and I will do our best to take questions along the way, and there will also be time for a short Q&A towards the end today. Now, before we start, we have a question for you. If we could ask, and again, just use the chat here, how many of you are familiar with Scale Up version 1.0? So for those of you that are not familiar with version 1.0, as we're going to talk about today, that started actually back in 2018. We've had about 7,000 some people that's gone through it. Business schools, incubators, accelerators, high school, venture funds, fund of funds, national development programs, and everything in between. But with Scale Up Europe, we're definitely taking many big steps forward. So anyone feel free to add in any comments around your experience and your familiarity with Scale Up version 1.0. So in today's session, it's going to be myself and Scott. I'm joining from Norway, and Scott is joining from Italy, and we'll be talking through the content and why this really, we think, is an exciting time for Europe. So the agenda that we have, and you've probably seen this in the invite, is Europe's scaling problem and what we can do about it. Why we think it's important for Europe, why we developed Scale Up Europe, how it works, how people are already using it, what we've learned so far, and maybe most importantly, how you can kind of bring it back to your ecosystem. And that's going to be our agenda. Now, this is one of the first photos right here for Scale Up Europe in action. This photo was taken in the Norwegian fjords just a few weeks ago, where we had the largest angel investor network in Norway called Connect. And we're doing a significant founder and angel investor development program, and we're using Scale Up Europe as the platform. And it's safe to say that we're getting significantly positive reviews and feedback on that program. And we're going to talk more about that as we progress. But I want to share this photo because if there's anyone joining who's not familiar with Scale Up from previously, it is basically a highly immersive, highly competitive experience where teams of 3 to 6 people form up to take a case company from idea to a successful exit transaction. And of course, along the way, a lot of things can happen. A lot of things do happen with regards to growth strategy, leadership, term sheets, fundraising, liquidity events, and eventually a full exit. We also have a couple of photos here. I saw that we had someone joining us from Romania. So I have a couple of photos here from Cluj. So this is about maybe 6 weeks ago. We had the pleasure of working with the Transylvanian Angel Network in collaboration with the BRD, where we had again a mix of founders, angel investors, local VCs, local ecosystem builders, going through the Scale Up Europe in Romania, and that was another really cool experience. And it validated, very important, it validated the use case for how Scale Up Europe, not only for founders, but also for the investors and the ecosystem. So we'll talk more about that. Now, the feedback that we've been getting, which is significantly different from what we normally would get on the Scale Up version 1.0, is this should basically be mandatory. I think that's been the number one consistent feedback from founders. This is a must-have. Every founder should take this, and this should be mandatory. And when we do sort of debrief interviews with founders, what they're telling us is that there's so much content that they didn't know that they needed, that they've been able to absorb and take in just a couple of days' work. Consistently also from the investor side, both angels and VCs, is that this is a really powerful and really useful program. And of course, we're going to expand on that as we go. Now, if we go into why we think this is important. So for those of you that have been sort of paying attention the last couple of years, it's been increasingly clear that the European ecosystem is diverging, and not in a good way, versus the US and Asia. And one of the most classic images is probably this. So this is Andrew McAfee at MIT, and he developed a framework that says, what do we have in terms of going public from scratch? So companies that were formed less than 50 years ago and have reached a 10 billion market cap in public markets. And when you look at this, what you're seeing is basically all the big US companies. And then, unfortunately, in comparison, is a very small set of bubbles on the EU side. This picture today, if we were to include SpaceX, Anthropic, and OpenAI in a couple of weeks, would look significantly less positive. So this picture haven't really moved in the right way that we would like to see. So it has been said for many years, and maybe more now than ever, that Europe needs to step up its entrepreneurship effort, not just starting companies, but really truly scaling companies. And we're seeing this sort of in different formats. Here's one post around the EU startup and scale-up strategy, where work has been progressing. We've written about this, like what would it actually take for Europe to build a 1 trillion euro company? And it will be done. It's just a question of time. About a week and a half ago, we saw EQT beat Atomico to manage the 5 billion Scale Up Europe fund. This is important because by most European standards, a 5 billion Scale Up fund is a significant fund which aims to be a part of solving these challenges that we saw. And EQT, that's probably quite rightfully won it, has said a lot about why they're excited and why they think they're the right partner. And I think all of Europe, both from the public sector side, but also from the private sector side, is like, this is amazing. We have a 5 billion fund. But it's worth reflecting on that. Earlier this year, Anderson Horowitz, or A16Z, alone raised 15 billion. So a single VC fund in the US raised 15 billion, which is 3 times the European scale-up fund. So even the best efforts that we've seen so far for Europe, we need to do a lot more. And this is the sort of story that Scale Up Europe fits into. Scott.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where we have a big theme on shifting from startup, where many of the incentives have been so far in Europe, and the metrics have been looking at how many companies have started, to now how do we actually scale those companies. And so, Chris, if you move to the next slide, if we look at how this works in terms of starting with mindset, are we thinking big enough? And often what we found in Europe up until now is that the founders and all the ecosystem has not had large enough ambitions. So starting with mindset and moving to ambitions, not how can we be a nice regional player, and rather how can we be a true global champion? And this brings us to sales and revenue. Are we thinking in terms of getting to 10 million euros in sales? Are we thinking in terms of how quickly can we get to 1 billion euros in sales? Which, of course, then moves us over to capital. So, do we have enough capital available, especially at the later stages? So, one of the trends that we'd like to see reversing looking forward is you get to your Series A, and then for your Series B, you move to the United States, or your Series C, and you say we're going to do that in the US, and then we'll quote on the US market. Now, of course, we know the US capital markets today are much larger, but there's an opportunity here for Europe to really take a place and say, how do we take a company all the way to the exit and liquidity event so that that money can be recycled back into the local ecosystems inside Europe instead of always being, and then we go to Silicon Valley and quote on NASDAQ. Because otherwise, we don't have that liquidity taking place in Europe, which is necessary so that then we go back to reset, start the circle over again, and have the mindset and the ambitions to build larger companies. Next slide, please, Chris. So, what this is really doing is moving us from the entire ecosystem thinking about starting to how can we support in the scaling. And next slide, Chris. And what that means is instead of talking about how do we get to a unicorn, how do we get to 1 trillion euro outcomes? And so we're seeing a number of organizations that are about to quote on the markets in the next few weeks. This Friday, SpaceX, which is targeting $1.8 trillion. Soon we have Anthropic, OpenAI, Databricks, to name just a few. But we even have a couple of Europeans sneaking in there. So Revolut is getting ready for their IPO, which will be the largest startup IPO in the history of Europe. And we also have Bending Spoons from Milano that has just filed to quote in the United States and will be a significantly larger transaction than Italy has seen in the startup scene ever before. Next slide, please. So to close that off, we have a quote here from the CEO at European Investment Fund. And she's saying, I go to Helsinki and we look at where are the European pension funds and the insurance companies and why are they not investing in European venture capital? And now this is moving ahead, and we're seeing they are actually investing in European venture capital, and that we're making recommendations that we can have even bigger ambitions. So, her question, are you ready to follow and participate in building a stronger Europe with innovation leaders and global tech champions? Is the right question. And our answer is yes. And Scale Up Europe is supporting initiatives like this as we move forward. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Scott. Now, so why did we develop Scale Up Europe? So again, for those of you that are not familiar with the background, so back in 2018, we were working very closely with Innovation Norway, the Norwegian National Innovation Agency. And long story short, out of that collaboration, we developed the first version of Scale Up. It was designed for the Norwegian ecosystem. It kind of expanded and it grew, expanded more, it grew more. And fast forward today, we've taken more than 7,000 people and we've delivered in more than 50 countries all told. So we've done, I think, a really good sort of generation 1.0. And then we started working on Scale Up MENA, we started working on Scale Up Africa, we started working on all of these sort of more regional focuses. And we said, well, clearly we need something that really truly focus on Europe. And Scott, what is it and how does it work then?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, I think one of the things I would start with here, if you want to go on to the next slide, is this team-based experiential scale up simulation. For those of you who haven't seen Scale Up, you're really put in the position to experience the journey. So this isn't slides and exams. This is master classes, programs, accelerators, getting people into the role. So even when we're in the classroom, the learning is fully experiential. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, Chris, what we're covering here is 10 years in 3 days. So we start with the earliest stages of the founder's journey and then walk them all the way through with all the challenges that we see companies face along the way. How do you fix a broken cap table? Um, we're dealing with angels, and then all of a sudden we have very complex term sheets. How do we reset an ESOP? How do we get the teams to experience the entire founder's journey in the context of Europe? So, Scale Up 1.0 had a global context. Scale Up Europe, on the other hand, has a European context. And all of these different characters you'll meet along the way are actual European investors, European situations, European dilemmas. And then how do we get through to corporate venture capital and eventually to an exit? So, next slide, Chris. If you look at this, all the research on this has driven from European content. All the sources you see here have been consulted, everybody from Slush to Sifted to Balderton Capital to 20VC, the EIF, SICTIC, and NIF, to name just a few. And the next slide, Chris. And this is also built on European companies. So the companies that you'll find, some of them have the names changed for NDA purposes, but you'll recognize that many of the leading organizations in Europe are included in here, and there are over 30 unique cases: defense tech, clean tech, deep tech, ocean tech, all based in the European region and all wanting to scale. And so the question is, which teams are going to be able to do this in a way that's going to work? Next slide, Chris. So you can also see here that there are different markets that the companies can go to. So when Chris and I kicked this off earlier this afternoon, we said companies need to think more globally. And so during the simulation, companies can look at different markets, ranging from Asia Pacific to Latin America to MENA to Canada and USA, that all have different costs and complexities in entering, and they can take strategic decisions in terms of which markets am I going to decide to emphasize and where will I invest and not invest. And then next slide, Chris. They're also going to meet real investors. So looking at real term sheets going all the way to series C, D, E, and beyond, and understanding how the various actors in Europe are actually approaching this. So starting from the angel to the safe notes to the real life mini term sheets, and then later stage highly complex details. And as we note here, term sheets you would hope to never see in real life. So this isn't going to be an easy walk through the park. Rather, it's challenging, just as real life is. And if you look at next slide, Chris, the advanced deal structures, we have some examples from here in terms of what's going on in space and defense, in terms of what someone like BPI France would ask for before they would invest into your scale up, and in terms of what a German pension fund would look for before they would ever even think about going into a scale up type of organization. And so we help the founders and the ecosystem players to work through this complexity, because these are real terms. So this is what we're seeing in real life and what people need to experience. And so, Chris, why don't you talk through a little bit about what we've learned so far and what we've seen in the countries that this has been tested out in and deployed in already?
Absolutely, thank you. So, so far we've had five sort of full scale sessions. We've done internal testing, we've done a lot of piloting, but we've had five sort of primary locations. So we've done Bergen, Norway, we've done Sunnmøre, Norway, which is in the Norwegian fjords and Alps. We've done Cluj, Romania. We've actually done Vancouver, BC, and with the big paradox, we've done Boston in the US, although for a European fund, mostly European founders. So across those first, we've taken about 180 people through it. And what we're seeing is a couple of things. So first of all, we're seeing a significant degree of competitiveness, engagement, and enthusiasm. And this is important because people are busy. But when we get started on this program or the masterclass, we see people really leaning in. We've had founders, bankers, angels, VCs, government representatives, regional fund of funds. We've had ecosystem developers. We've had innovation cluster leaders. We've had a lot of different people, but we see across the board a very high degree of enthusiasm and engagement. We've also seen that it fits really, really well into different angel programs and different accelerator programs and different financing development programs. So here we have one example from the Norwegian Connect, and they are now running a version or running cohort number 3, and then we have cohort number 4 coming up. So all told, we'll probably take between 120 and 150 people through this. And they are truly all in, and they've made this one of the core pillars of the work that the Angel Network is doing. It's a great collaboration. And this is a quote. So this is interesting. So Alfred here, he used to be a politician. He used to be on the parliament in Norway, and he used to be the number one entrepreneurship spokesperson at the national political level. He recently took up a job as a CEO of an investment fund, and he was a part of Scale Up Europe in our last cohort. And his feedback was basically, this is an amazing crash course for everything we need to know. So not only the founders, but everything we need to know when it comes to building, scaling, and financing companies all the way through. And also one of the things that he told us sort of offhand was that, oh, there's so many people in the Norwegian ecosystem, in the political ecosystem, that should understand this. So again, when we talk about the challenges for Europe, it is not just the founders, it's everyone in that ecosystem stack that should be more familiar with what are we actually talking about. And if Europe wants to catch up with our competitive ecosystems, again, keep message, it's not just the founders, it's everyone that's involved in the ecosystem development in different ways. So what did we learn? Well, first of all, we've learned that Scale Up Europe is way better than the previous Scale Up, and that was to be expected. That follows from the development work that we've done. It is also way more complex for the participants. So again, going back to some of the things that Scott talked about, so each team has roughly 5 people, three people, 6 people, but roughly 5 people. Each team has different roles: CEO, CFO, chief revenue officer, investor relations, and so on. So it's quite complex to go through, but it's also pretty complex and challenging to run. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's about 2,600 cards, all told. There's a number of tasks, canvases, exercises, pitches, presentations, and judging. But a lot of people come up to me afterward and say, Chris, this is really strange because it feels so realistic. So whereas the previous scale up had maybe a lot of focus on equity financing, this is a much more broad-based, much more holistic, and also hopefully much more realistic experience. Big feedback. This really opens eyes and minds. So a lot of people say, we were not aware of these things. We had no previous experience with these things. We didn't really know what a Series A term sheet looked like. Now we've seen them, and they kind of scared us a little bit. Without a doubt, founders are telling us this is incredibly valuable for our fundraising efforts. So founders have significant benefit when it comes to the fundraising, but then also everyone. So again, going back to the angel networks, VCs, innovation agencies, everyone is basically telling us that this is clearly needed because the knowledge gaps, the mastery gaps, the confidence gaps are still absolutely here. We're not really focused only on the early stages, like how to raise your first round of financing. That's pretty well covered. What we talk about is everything that happens afterwards. So seed plus, seed extension, Series A, Series B, and beyond. So that's what we learned. Now, in terms of who this is for, Scott, do you want to take that or should I?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to if you want to just go
Yeah.
on to the next slide. So, in getting feedback from all the different ecosystem players that we've encountered over the last 9 years with Scale Up, what we found is that there are many people that need exposure to Scale Up that don't fit into the title of founder or investor. And so, if you look on this slide, we've gone through a lot of the different groups that we found to benefit from this. Of course, there are all the founders that you would normally see, but in addition, both faculty and learners at business schools and engineering schools, for example, accelerators and incubators. We've worked with some entrepreneurship organizations where there can be members that have never thought about scale up before, but they'd like to learn and be exposed to this. Mentors and board members, as well as angel networks and investment funds, and not just venture capital, but even private equity and fund of funds have been looking at this. Government and policymakers, national innovation agencies and regional innovation agencies that are looking at how can they have more impact on what they're doing in investing and building scale up, economic development agencies that are global, innovation clusters, and then even banks, pension funds, corporate innovators, so CVCs and in-house innovation agencies, and the corporate venture capital funds that want to take a larger and leading role in VC. So there's a very big range of constituents. We don't even have them all on here. For example, we've also had some lawyers that are working in as service providers to the industry that found this just fascinating to go through so they could understand what are the other parties facing and how can they be more effective in ensuring that this process runs as efficiently as possible. So if you want to go on to the next slide, Chris, I think we can talk about a couple of things here, and maybe you and I share this, Chris, in terms of the 6 building blocks. So we know this is for angels, we know this is for networks and programs and ecosystems, but how does it really work? So when I spoke with you earlier, we talked about shifting mindsets and boosting confidence. And one way that Scale Up Europe helps in this is building by doing. So instead of saying, let me tell you about term sheets or let me tell you about negotiating with potential investors, they're actually doing this. And it's very hands-on and very interactive. And this also leads to a necessity for teamwork and leadership. And so making sure that everybody owns their role. And as Chris mentioned earlier, this is super realistic. So you're starting from zero revenue and you need to get to 100 million. And you also don't have any capital. So just like a real life founding team, how are you going to get from zero to that 10 billion or more that's required when you get to a liquidity event? And how do you manage all the term sheets, cap tables, so that you can get to that exit and liquidity event, and even look at tools like secondaries, so that you can get partial liquidity back to some of your investors. So all of the things that real life founders and ecosystem players go through are incorporated into this in a European in-depth context. I'll turn it over to you there, Chris, if you want to just make a few more points. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, and we have a few questions as well.
We do, which is great. I want to take maybe 2 minutes here on this one. So when we were developing and piloting Scale Up Europe in sort of their first iterations, one of the things that stuck with us, and we've seen this again and again, was that a lot of founders and angel investors and early stage investors, they're not really familiar with what it means to raise financing over time or to raise capital over multiple rounds. So part of what we packed into this program is what we now call the EFRL. So most people in Europe are familiar with the TRL, so technology readiness level. And you'll, for example, see that in most universities, we talk about, is your product or your research on TRL level 1 or 2 very early? Are you like 6 or 7 or even 8 or 9? And the TRL is pretty well embedded. We are developing the same, but for that entrepreneurial finance. And it really means, are you investor ready? Or are you lacking money, capital, but not really sure where to go? And we've seen this really clearly over the last 4 programs that we've run, that once we apply this EFRL framework, most founders, most angels, most angel networks, most ecosystems go, oh wow, we have a lot of work to do to get more investor ready, which is part of the program. Now, just building on what you said here, Scott, in terms of what are some of the key outcomes and the key takeaways. So what we've seen now in the first few programs is the following. Number one, the scale up mindset and kind of growth ambition. And we've had many founders coming back and saying, we recognize now that our current growth trajectory is not enough. We need to ramp up faster, and we need to grow much tougher. A lot of focus on cap tables, term sheets, capital strategy, and building that into liquidity and exits. And then there's been a lot of focus around collaboration and the ecosystem piece. So the main things that people walk away with is number one, a deep understanding of what it means to really scale up, and that's important for everyone in the ecosystem. Number two is a deep appreciation for startup financing from early idea to successful exit transaction. And third is really the kind of the collaboration between different stakeholders, and that's been really successful in the angel programs, for example. So, Scott, do you want to take a little bit about how to get started?
Yeah, there are several ways you can get involved in this, both online and in person. So one of the first, of course, is to plan an upcoming masterclass. So in your market or your region, build a masterclass. You can also join a discovery session. So we're offering a number of discovery sessions throughout Europe, both in person and online, starting in July and going all the way through the fall. Uh, Join into some of our existing programs that we're already running and planning, or host your own discovery session. So what we found is that in your local market, opening up to people and saying, here is, 1 day discovery session for key decision makers is a really effective way to do this. We can also support you on this in some cases. So if you're interested in your market and running this, talk to us. And then, of course, join the Scale Up Europe Lead Facilitator program. So we have some of those coming up in the near future, and you're more invited to enroll and join in these and get building your expertise on how to run Scale Up Europe, how to facilitate it, and how to sell it. So, what are we going to do from there? Bring it to your ecosystem.
Exactly.
Three ways, online or in person. First is discovery. So a discovery class can be 1 day. You can also do a half day online, but I really recommend a day. In person, of course, has higher impact. Create a master class. So, or bring a master class to your area, and importantly, develop a program. So programs can be as short as 1 month, as long as 3 years, and work together with accelerators, fund of funds, ecosystem builders, innovation agencies on how do you improve in your local ecosystem the outcome for scale ups, which is a hot topic on policymaker and educational institutions all over the place. So where are we doing this, Chris? What's coming up?
Well, our next upcoming ones are going to be in London. So in London, we're going to be in July 9th. And that one is pretty much packed, and we have a lot of really interesting, quite senior people joining us. And then right now we're also speaking with some great partners in Berlin. We haven't confirmed dates yet, but we definitely have Berlin coming up. And then we are planning, it's not official, but we're planning to open up for Zurich. So London, Berlin, Zurich is sort of on the immediate map, but we're going to spend a lot of time on this, and we're going to spend a lot of effort to get this out into the European ecosystem. And we'll be partnering with different organizations. We'll be partnering with different events. We're speaking right now with Slush and Tech Barbecue and many others. So there will be a lot of focus on this, and we do invite everyone else to kind of join and think about how you can engage and how you can run either by hosting discovery sessions, like Scott said, in person or online, organizing masterclasses, but really building this into programs. That's kind of where we get the most benefit for the participants. But from our side, we're actually very privileged to be working with this. We have super feedback from the first 5 cohorts. the first roughly 180 participants, and we're now looking forward to moving that from the first 150 plus to the first 1,000, which will happen in the next 12 months. So that's where we are with Scale Up Europe. Be very happy to take any questions, take any comments. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat that we're going to pick up on. But any questions, big or small, feel free. And for the questions, feel free to either use the chat or you should be able to unmute and speak here directly.
While we're doing that, Frank is asking, can you share one or two success stories of European companies that have scaled successfully across borders, and what specific lessons from these can be replicated by other startups? So in the Scale Up Europe program, we have a number of these success stories that we walk through, and we show how this can be done. I think what you can do here, Frank, is also decide if you want to target it to a specific industry or a specific region so that it's most relevant to your participants. The the one thing I would say, the biggest lessons, and we've incorporated these in, are about, how do you work across borders? Which markets are you focusing on? So don't say something like, even I take the example of United States. Well, United States is not one market. It's actually 9 markets. So where are you focusing on in the United States? And then why are you going to win against the people that are there? So getting that mindset of, where am I going deep? Where are my customers? How quickly can I convert them? And how do I make sure I do this without unnecessary complexity or cost? So those are some of the areas, for example, that I've seen in the really interesting discussion with the founders and with their investors and the other ecosystem supporters is, where are we going and why? And let's make sure our strategy is very clear on why this market, not that market, et cetera, not just because we think there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, and if I just add to that before Stuart, so one of the key pillars in Scale Up Europe is the idea that you have to expand your market footprint and you have to expand your revenue and your revenue base. And the way that you do that technically is by these market expansion cards that you see on the screen here. And a lot of people have been coming up to me afterward and said, Chris, that was really interesting because these market expansion cards, they're so clear. But when we tie it back to our own company, we realize we are far from having that clarity around our go-to-market. And we need to be much better of developing our own real-life market expansion, similar to what we have on the cards here. So expand international markets and do it quicker and maybe a little bit more aggressively than we normally would. That's one key point. Stuart, please.
Yes, thanks, Chris. In terms of comparison to Scale Up One, I see in addition to the market expansion cards, you also, I think we mentioned earlier when you've added churn. What are some of the other elements that are new as opposed to upgrading existing, categories that you have?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Thank you. So for those of you that are not familiar, Stuart has significant experience running Scale Up in Canada, and he is one of the many people that have sort of experience with the Scale Up version 1.0. So Scale Up 1.0 was largely focused on equity financing. It had a little bit more, but that was sort of the key focus. Now we've expanded it to a much more broader menu, and the goal is as much as we can all the pieces that you need to be able to build and scale a company. So there's go-to-market, product development, AI, market expansion, growth strategy. There's customer churn and revenue churn. There's a significant number of new advisors. There's much more focus on the kind of the commercial side, not just the financing and equity side. And when we then pull all this together, a lot of the investor cards and the term sheets are also much more balanced for what you require. So if we make it simple, we'll say that the first scale up was largely equity financing, and Scale Up Europe is a much more holistic, much more balanced approach, and that's also reflected in the team, because you typically want to have 5 people per team: CEO, CFO, investor relations, chief revenue, and chief product officer. So those are the 5 key roles that we want to fill. And happy to go into more details separately, Stuart. Question here from Zander. So what's the business model? So we actually have several business models. So one of the business model is like we have with Stuart. It's kind of a train the trainer, and then Stuart and other partners can take it to market themselves, and we applaud that. And we have very capable people like Vishal and Enrico and others that have extensive experience running this independently. And then second, our business model is usually to partner with innovation agencies, partner with national development organizations, partner with accelerators and incubators, partner with investment firms and fund of funds, and anyone who's sort of working to develop the ecosystem. And then we typically do this either through a masterclass, through a program, or through a train the trainer. Personally, I would love to do more train the trainer, so we can upskill people that can really run this and really run it broadly, and that's what we hope to see. So, Sander, I hope that answered the question. And then when it comes part of the second part, what's the position in the Netherlands? So I've actually been running programs for investment firms in the Netherlands, but we never found anyone to work with to run like a startup program. So any of the sort of tech leap or some of the incubators, accelerators, like any of those would sort of be a great partner to be working with. Scott, if I can ask you a question. So now that we've sort of talked about this and we're starting to get the ball rolling quite literally, what is one or two things that you hope to see this year with regards to Scale Up Europe?
I'd like to see it get into more places. So there are so many different markets in Europe and so many user groups that can benefit from this. So I would love to see this expanding to those potential buyers that can really benefit. And there are those go from Central Europe, where we're already doing quite a bit, to Western Europe. There are opportunities almost everywhere. And so what excites me is, I love to see a week when we say, okay, we're running 30 Scale Up Europe programs this week. That's when I'm saying, okay, now we're really having impact. There's a lot of discussion in Europe about we need more scale up, we need more action. But this is one of the very few concrete, tangible programs that has impact. And so that's where I'm excited to see really this running and just saying, oh wow, look how many people we're not only touching, but we're building on with concrete programs that go beyond a 2-day event to oh, you've really helped me get my company to Series A, B, you've really helped my accelerator, you've really helped the funds I'm invested in, etc.
Scott, I just wrote down 30 programs per week in Europe.
Yeah,
That's going to be our KPI for Christmas.
right.
That's good. But it's actually it's very valid, because what we're talking about here is not like a one-time stunt that someone like maybe 20 people got to see. We really believe in embedding this across the educational space, incubators, accelerators, co-working, fund of funds, innovation agencies, and we know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people across Europe that should be involved in this, and that's what we're working towards. Stuart, did you have a new question, or is that an old one?
Yes, in terms of
Good.
Scott's comment that the US is really 9 different markets, what's the equivalent analogy for Europe? As how many different markets do we have in Europe versus, seeing Europe as one market versus how many different markets have we got?
Yeah, good question. Complex answer. So you can look at language, you can look at historical, you can look at regions. You can break it up a lot of different ways. The reason I often say US is nine different markets is there have been some especially word of mouth marketing agencies that have mapped the United States and how people talk to each other and how buying takes place, etc. So that's why the nine markets of US is quite well defined, and there are maps that show how that works and how you can leverage it. Europe, of course, being Europe, there's a lot more history. There's a lot of languages. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of rivers and mountains. So it's different. But what I would say is this, Stuart, if you read the Draghi report, he says that we need to target more than 1 million individuals for development in deep tech skills. And this needs to be pan-European. This needs to be technical, vocational. He's made 380 recommendations on what Europe needs to do. And I know some people are going to log out soon because we're at time. I'll give an example. I was giving a talk this morning to a group of board directors, and these are senior board directors from large organizations across predominantly Europe. And we started to talk about, dependency on technologies from external suppliers. So let's even take something like cloud, which is quite a well-known commodity now. Um, how many companies in Europe depend on AWS for cloud, whether you know it or not? And the answer is somewhere around 85%. Okay, so there are so much low-hanging fruit, and there are so many things that need to be done. And this is just an example of cloud. I'm not without talking about cybersecurity or LLMs or defense or healthcare. So there are many, many things to be done, and there's a well-educated population, and there's a lot of capital. So it's connecting these dots now is what really needs to happen. And of course, the last 10 years have shown that Europe has maybe not been moving as fast as they could be on these things. And so now it's time to run. I don't know if I completely answered your question, Stuart, but there are specific markets you can map in Europe, and I've done this with some portfolio companies and looking at where the I think more it's where are the opportunities and where do you want to leverage and where do you have advantages in language or geography, etc.
Yeah, so if I understand you, you're almost building markets by industry sectors as opposed to countries or geography, right?
Yeah, you can do it by verticals. You can do it a bunch of different ways. It really depends on what industry are you also tackling. I work with a B2B mining AI company that builds digital twins, and they don't do regions at all. They have 250 customers, and most of those customers are operating in more than 50 countries. So they look at this in a completely different way. They look at it in verticals in terms of, oh, these guys are into nickel, and these are into diamonds, and these are into gold, and these are doing oil, as opposed to anything to do with a region because it doesn't work that way.
And so with Scale Up Europe, you're taking into account all these variables, right?
Yeah, you can do a few different ways with Scale Up Europe. Again, we don't want to bring unnecessary complexity into this. I mean, otherwise you could just blow people's brains out. So what we do in Scale Up Europe is you have countries and you invest on country basis, etc. But you can also have decisions you're taking in terms of who your strategic alliances are with, etc. So there are different ways, and I can show you the next time we meet up, Stuart, how we do that in terms of how you want to take it and how sophisticated your audience is. Because you can go with some of the tasks, you can go really deep into this, but with other audiences, they might not be ready for that. So you have to look at who's in the room and what do they need to get out of it.
Thank you. That's
I think so, Scott. I think we're going to take one final question and recognize that we're a little bit over time here. But Frank is asking, what are the most important reasons that people participate in Scale Up Europe workshops and masterclasses? How would you answer that, Scott? And then I'll close out with my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about the founders, they want to learn how to do this successfully and make less mistakes. If you talk about the accelerators, they want to learn how better to support the organizations. If you talk about the policymakers, they're looking at what can I do to better support the organizations that we're working with. And then the second part of the question, how important is it to enable participants to share experiences with each other? Well, it's great if they can, because that's also a marketing tool, right? So there's a visibility element to this. Inside some of the larger accelerators, et cetera, they already have this sharing of experiences. So I would answer it's not that important they share, but it's great when they do because that gets a virality of this moving, and that's really helpful in terms of getting more people involved. And Chris, I'll let you close out with your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think my experience now has been that there's three different answers. Number one, for the founders, it's really about their growth mindset, growth ambitions, and fundraising. Um, for accelerators and incubators, it's kind of a train the trainers on the staff, which is actually a pretty big and important area. And then for investors, it's actually to learn how to be a better investor because, and this is important, a lot of the European investors from angels and upward, they're pretty comfortable with the early stages, but everything that happens kind of Series A and post, that's a little bit new. And when you go from Series A all the way through to a liquidity event and exit, again, that's a new field. So different groups will have different and very valuable takeaways that we see. Emmett, last question, and then we're going to start wrapping up. Go ahead, my friend.
Thanks, Chris. Super valuable for anybody still listening. We had an amazing experience with Chris. His energy and his practicality was a great event. I was just kind of curious. We were blessed that EBRD paid the fee, so we didn't even know how much it was. So the last question I asked here was, is there a structure of pricing that you can share with us somehow, some way? I'm sure it's different, maximum number of participants, all those types of things I think would be helpful for us as an organization to understand that we can't afford it. So who do we go to and how do we cover the cost? Well worth it, but there is a cost.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, I'll be happy to answer. So first of all, um, the pricing really depends on how many participants we have, which again drives how many facilitators we have, right? I think the smallest group that we've ever run with Scale Up has been like 4 people. That's too small to really matter. I think the biggest we've run is probably about 75 people, and 75 people requires more hands-on facilitators. Our sweet spot is about 25 to 30 participants. Our sweet spot is 3 days. We end up with two and a half. We really want to have 3 days. And the price tag for something like that is in the range of 12,000 to about 40,000. And the reason why we give that range is it depends on the makeup, it depends on the partners, it depends on how many people we need to fly in. But in simple terms, we're looking at like 25 euro or 25,000 euro as a ballpark. Having said that, Emmett, a lot of times we actually bring on partners. So even with some of the government agencies in Dubai, they bring in partners to fund it, right? So when we work with the Norwegian Angel Networks, it's partner funded by a national financing program, etc. So it's quite common that there are partners or sponsors involved in making this happen.
Yeah, thanks. As I said,
Yeah.
EBRD covered it for us, or we never would have had the experience. So it's fantastic, and we'll go back and ask them for some more to bring you back. We're looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. And I think if we look at every country in Europe, every region in Europe, everyone is now kind of waking up to the mandate, the need, and the urgency that we need to do something about this. And I'm regularly speaking with programs and policy makers that have the money, but they don't know what to do with it, right? So that's also an issue. So I'm pretty sure that for Romania, for the region, you will find policy programs that says we need to do something. Where are the good proposals, right? So that's a back and forth. Frank, go ahead, my friend.
I'm curious to know, Christian and Scott, what are your thoughts about online, perhaps short online workshops or master classes? You mentioned 4 people. Yeah, what experiences do you have there? Ideas?
Yeah. So everything that we've shown you can also be done online. We regularly run this in online formats. I think most people prefer the in person, but every now and then, which is like roughly 3 times a month, we do programs online because practical purposes, people are not able to travel, people are scattered all over, etc. So we can easily, or anyone can do this online, and most people have a preference for in person.
I was
And
also
then,
thinking about, Christian, sorry, I was also thinking about, bringing down costs. So, a small
oh yeah,
startup that has very limited funds that they can participate easily and thereby, scale up the whole thing.
true. So the startups would normally not pay. For example, in Switzerland, they do. But in most places, there would be an accelerator, an incubator, innovation agency, economic development, etc. So for most startups, this is not a cash cost; it's only a time cost, and that's been our preference. But that varies. It varies around different countries and different regions. But some of the work that we're looking at in Switzerland right now, the companies will be paying, and it will be a worthwhile fee for the companies. But generally, the startups would not pay for this. All right. Well, good. Listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining. This is the first of many conversations that we're going to be having around this topic. In the coming weeks, we're going to be announcing more locations and more events and more webinars. If anyone have any questions, please reach out to myself or to Scott. And then we look forward to getting a chance to hopefully work with many of you, and then Emmett and others. We hope to see you again. But the key message from our side is that the European ecosystem needs to scale up, and this is one very specific, very tangible proposal for how to make that happen. Scott, any quick closing from your side?
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you all in person and to seeing you be very successful with Scale Up Europe.
Fantastic, everyone. Wishing you a great rest of the day, a great rest of the morning for our friends in Canada, and then we hope to see you soon. All the best. Bye.
Super. Thanks, everybody.